Hi, everybody. I'd like to talk a little bit about supply chain risk management, and specifically from the perspective of how did it come about? Why do we have this need to look at supply chain risk management, to get software into our enterprises and train people to use these kinds of software and management techniques? So it grew out of, I think, a rather potent set of practical, important, and rather outrageous business experiences, okay? And I'm going to give you a very quick example that happened to me just yesterday to kind of show you the drivers of supply chain risk management at a kind of really micro level. I flew here from Washington, D.C. Reagan. My flight was delayed for about 5 hours yesterday. Why was it delayed? There was a $3 pin that went into the cockpit door that fell out and they couldn't find it. And this $3 pin, because it was missing, and because they looked in all of their inventory and had no visibility into any other pin, contacted other airlines at Reagan Airport, couldn't find the pin, and eventually had to fly in a plane from Houston to take us to San Francisco because they were missing this $3 cockpit door pin. Okay? And as I was flying here, I was thinking how ironic it was, because this is exactly the nature of what ResiliLink addresses and the nature of what we're trying to train our supply chain MBAs and MS students at University of Maryland to deal with as an issue, as an important priority issue. And we've been teaching supply chain risk management in my university. I've been teaching it for over a decade, and we have been rather hamstrung by the fact that we didn't have a set of tools, a commercial application that could bring together the best practices that we were seeing emerging in companies all across the world. And we were delighted when we became aware of ResiliLink and the Salesforce combination, because as a platform for teaching our students supply chain risk management practices, we felt that this was going to be a very unique and important step for us to get in their hands. And we have had experience working with SAP and Oracle supply chain planning, ERP systems, for well over 15 years, and we were not convinced that those solutions, which we teach and use, had the kind of embodied management practices that we see crystallized in the ResiliLink software. And so we were very happy. We're in our second year of use. We're a customer of ResiliLink. We licensed their software, and we've had Sumit come to our school, talk to our students, and we have now, as it says here, we have about 120 master's degree students that have learned about risk quantification and building visibility using ResiliLink, and it's now moved not only to the MS but also into the MBA program. Now, just to kind of put it in a little bit of context, I don't know your backgrounds, your disciplines, but 1/4 of our new MBA class this year has declared supply chain as a major, and this is very common across the United States right now. As finance jobs collapsed with the downturn in the economy, we are starting to see students flock to supply chain as being the next generation of growth in terms of jobs and career prospects. And yet we've had no way to teach a very important core principle of the discipline until recently. So let me tell you practically what we see. My graduate assistant from 4 years ago, who took my supply chain risk course, got interested in supply chain risk, was just 2 weeks ago hired to be the supply chain risk officer for Tiffany's Corporation, okay? So 4 years out of an MBA program, he's running the supply chain risk program for Tiffany's, which is, as you know, a fully integrated luxury manufacturer. And the reason that they brought him aboard, which is the reason many of our recruiters and companies that come to us hire our students, is because of this issue of conflict minerals, or the risk quantification is being demanded by their boards of directors. Supply chains have had, in some sense, a pass in terms of dealing with boards until very recently. And boards are now coming along and saying, listen, you're killing us in terms of insurance premiums, okay? you're really creating a lot of uncertainty among our shareholders. We need to have a way to have visibility into the chain, into potential risks, and we need to have people who are able to analyze and recommend mitigation strategies. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, and that's why we brought on Resilink. Now, we think that supply chain risk management is the critical issue in today's market for those of you who manage production and operations. And we say that because that's obvious if you look at what's happening in the world. We just recently had a book came out called Extreme Supply Chain Management that was a collaboration with the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. Those of you in supply chain probably have heard of CSCMP. And we say in the book that there is literally a new age upon us where there is constant volatility, there is very little downtime between events, and very little downtime between coming from one event that's gigantic to another event we then have to manage. And these examples hold true. So if you look at just a few of these examples up on the board, Densply, which is a Resilink customer who I've spoken to the supply chain manager of, okay, they had their core supplier for one of their key revenue drivers in the evacuation zone of Fukushima. And when the reactor melted down, it also melted down some of the technology and some of the ways in which product design was being transmitted. They literally had to, as a result of that, Densply had to redesign the whole product because their supplier was knocked out of commission for so long due to the nuclear evaluation. They took a $200 million revenue hit and a drop in share price. Okay? If you look on the bottom left and you look at what happened from the Thai floods, for example, well, yeah, it cost companies like Western Digital, almost $250 million hit, but it drove Ericsson literally out of the cell phone business. I don't know if you remember the old partnership of Sony Ericsson. Well, it's Sony now. And why is it Sony? Because Ericsson, during the tsunami, which they didn't really understand the potential magnitude of the disruption, knocked out 20% of their cell phone production. And yet, only about 3 or 4 months later, the Thai floods occurred, knocking out 20% more of their cell phone production and leading to a 247 million euro loss. And therefore, they had to turn around and then sell off to their share of the partnership back to Sony. So this is the degree to which it's a game changer. It could literally knock you out of a line of business if you don't handle supply chain risk management well. Okay? And it also forces pretty dramatic turns, as we see, for example, in Japanese tsunami impacting production of cars. They literally had to import parts from the United States in order to satisfy Japanese production and Asian production. So we're pretty clear at this point, looking at the facts, that these are not isolated occurrences, and this is a constant theme of what you're dealing with in your business environment. Now, 2 major studies, one by MIT and one by my center, in the last 12 months, 60% of companies surveyed said that their key performance indicators had dropped by 3% or more because of supply chain disruptions, and over a third of companies that we looked at regarded information supply base as their supply base as an information black hole, as a critical risk source for them. Now, I can tell you that scientists have told us, this came out just recently in Time magazine, that if you fall into a black hole, you feel pain for about a third of a second and then it's over. But if you have an information black hole with your supply base, the pain almost never ends. It keeps going. And this is the pain point that Resilink, I think, really does do a great job in addressing. And Resilink provides, as Sumit mentioned, a very rapid way to map the supply chain, which formerly has been very difficult to get this information and to aggregate it. And I'm very impressed with the methodology that they use working with the companies in order to get information from the Tier 1 and Tier 2 suppliers. It's very impressive how quickly they can aggregate the information and then put in the analytics to be able to gain benefit from it. The other thing that we've heard from their customers, and I was at their customer conference in New Jersey, and their customers, I think, were rather unified in talking about how, because they could respond proactively to events, they actually didn't have to pay some of the heavy premiums associated with things like freight expedites when you're in competition during a crisis, things of that nature. And they were able to preserve shareholder value. So lastly, if you look at the model that Resilink is promoting in their software, the practice model, it's the same model that Cisco used, for example, that developed for itself, that they used to mobilize after the tsunami event. And whereas Ericsson was driven out of the cell phone business by their response to tsunami, Cisco didn't lose any revenue as a result of their disruption during tsunami. And analysts have said it took Cisco, because of the real-time sense and respond infrastructure, which Resilink now is able to provide to companies, 2 days to do what other companies in that situation took 2 weeks to do in terms of analyzing and mobilizing their supply base to overcome and mitigate the disruption. So Resilink is very, very valuable in encapsulating and very quickly providing to a company that set of management best practices which helps you to very rapidly overcome risk. And Rachel is going to talk about how that impacts a frontline company. What does it mean to actually be a frontline manager using Resilink to try to manage risk?
Thank you, Sandy. It's good to be here today to talk about risk management and what we did to incorporate that into our best practices at Palo Alto Networks. I am the manager of the Supply Chain Risk Management Department, and before that I was responsible for supply chain on the MPI side as well as for sustaining. A little bit about Palo Alto first. We were founded in 2005. Palo Alto Networks provides network security products that protect against threats such as viruses and malware to large enterprises such as service providers and financial institutions. The company grew about 55% year over year. It continues to do that today. And we add about 1,000 customers per quarter. So with that kind of growth, it's really important that we had product available at all times. We have a fairly simple supply chain, which is pretty advantageous when you have a small, fast-growing company. Our procurement and manufacturing is 100% outsourced, and the majority of our hardware is manufactured by one partner at one manufacturing site. In 2012, we went public, and it was around that time that the company completed a enterprise risk assessment, and supply chain was highlighted as a key risk area. However, by then we had already begun to focus on risk, supply chain risk within our supply chain. The company established an enterprise risk management initiative, and in 2014 the Supply Chain Risk Management Department was created. So for a company of our size, whose time to market and managing hypergrowth was our main imperative, we were really unique in recognizing early on the need for incorporating risk management practices starting in product development, as early in the process of design development as possible, and then throughout the entire product life cycle. So how did we get to this point? The 2011 was not a good year for supply chain managers. Japanese tsunami hit in March of 2011. It impacted over 70% of my supply chain. The Thailand floods hit a few months later, and we were severely impacted by our hardware, our hard drives. We purchased from Western Digital. We found that we were very dependent on contract manufacturers to provide data. We had to wait several days just for an initial response, and then over 2 weeks to identify impacted suppliers and parts. It took Because we lacked the analysis tools too, we had to manually manage data to identify which products would be affected. Our contract manufacturer was able to give us some raw data, but we needed to take that further to figure out what our potential revenue impact would have been and what kind of customer satisfaction impact we might have had. Thankfully, we didn't have any revenue loss, although there was an awful lot of effort that was put into that. But it did take in a considerable amount of investment in prepaid inventory and PPV. To Sandy's point, even though we didn't have a significant disruption, we did consider ourselves extremely lucky. We realized how unprepared we were, and we just asked ourselves, would we be successful in the next, when the next event occurs? So we decided to kind of stand back and look at what our challenges were. It's a very complex global supply chain. We didn't have any visibility into our suppliers, and we didn't even know who they were buying from. We realized that many of our tier 1 suppliers shared the same sub-tiers. So, meaning that their manufacturing sites could have been in the same geographical location, and we actually discovered that during the Thailand flood, where it wasn't so much the Western Digital that was impacted, it was their suppliers that were in the same area. Outsourcing our outsource model, our 100% outsourcing model, did contribute to our lack of supply chain visibility. We were very dependent on our manufacturing partner to supply chain data. And also, because our partner procured on behalf, we didn't have any leverage with our suppliers. They didn't even really know who we were, which made it really difficult for when you have allocation to get any kind of attention from the suppliers when they don't even know who you are. And we also had a very lean supply chain team. It was basically a department of one, because in a startup, you tend to be very lean. So we basically had to retask all of our resources, taking away their focus from our product development and our production. So first we knew we needed to take control of our supply chain. We knew that was number one, the thing that we needed to do. We established a supply-based management team to manage our suppliers. Resilink had been working with us through our manufacturing partner, but we decided to engage with them directly. The information that Resilink provided to us when they mapped our supply chain allowed us to know where each one of our parts were manufactured. It also let us know how long it would take for them to recover if there was a disaster. So when Resilink notifies us of an event that could disrupt our supply chain, we will know immediately which suppliers and sub-tiers and parts could be affected. We also know which products and how much revenue would be impacted. So that really helped us to quickly determine our financial impact, to start purchasing parts, and also to start managing our build plan for effectively. We changed the way that we approached the managing of our supply chain by implementing proactive processes. We identify the risks in our components that we design into our products, and we look at life cycle status and whether there are compatible crosses so we can second source. And through Resilink's supply chain mapping, we took it a step further by identifying suppliers and parts that were high risk in the supply chain, and that could actually the high risk of supply chain disruption, and establish the mitigation plans. So for instance, for our high risk suppliers, we can apply supplier management strategies to ensure the continuity of supply. For our single source parts, we can mitigate the risk of the part at the part number level. Knowing the recovery time, we can establish maybe enough buffer to cover for downtime. And also by identifying high-risk parts and suppliers, we can complete a product risk assessment. So we look at what our risks are within each product. And this allows us to remove high-risk parts from our designs or establish mitigation plans as early in the design phase as possible. From the very beginning, I knew that these processes needed to be upstream. By the time you design a product and launch it, it's too late. The design is what it is. It's pretty set. So the sooner that we can incorporate these practices during design phase, the better it is for the product once it finally does launch. As a result, by putting these solutions in place, we were able to standardize supply chain risk management strategy across the entire organization. Through ResiLink, we have gained visibility and control down through our supply chain by mapping the manufacturing site and identifying risk based on location and recovery. We have 83% of our suppliers mapped, and we have 73% of our parts mapped to 262 sites around the world. Working with supply chain risk community and ResiLink, we were able to establish best practices to help us identify and manage our risk. We've incorporated these risk management practices into the product development and supply chain processes. We basically made it part of our day-to-day activities. And as our business grows, we will continue to evolve and develop our processes and ensure continuity of supply through best-in-class supply chain management. And so in conclusion, the key to our success lies in recognizing early on that managing risk will contribute to the company's success. Visibility into our supply chain allows us to be prepared or perhaps even eliminate supply chain disruption. Thank you for your attention.
So actually, I'll grab a mic or if people want to go. Anyone have any questions?
That's very good. That's very good.
For Sandy or Rachel or Sumit, any questions out there? You guys see similar issues in the supply chains that you're managing? What are you guys using to manage them today? What you using core ERP like Oracle, SAP, or what are you guys using to manage today? Okay. Spreadsheets. Okay. Very, very common. Okay. Any questions for these guys? All right, we'll hang around for a few minutes up here after the session if you have any questions that you want to come up and ask. Otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your Dreamforce.